This is the third video in a set of 3 in which I present models and analogies of Christian beliefs. This video addresses how God interacts with our world and with us in particular. Some of the ideas may seem a bit off the wall, but I hope you find them food for thought. The first video explained how God is completely distinct from his creation. The picture was given of God first creating a capsule in heaven in which the physical universe could be cradled. Then God focused his action to cause the Big Bang, which instigated the universe about 14 billion years ago. The model showed other spikes, as we've drawn them, in the inner surface of heaven when God created life on earth and then the human race. In the fourth spike, he projected an aspect of himself into our world in the person of Jesus of Nazareth about 2,000 years ago. The 4 spikes here might suggest that God acted only 4 times, but that is not the case. Christians believe that God acts continually to sustain his creation. Indeed, the universe could no longer exist if God were to withdraw his continual support. The diagram here is too crude. We need to zoom in and see that the surface of heaven is in fact studded with a myriad of finer and finer filament-like spikes, each corresponding to God interacting with that point in space and time. How fine does this go? Between any 2 adjacent filaments, there will always be a finer one. Heaven, in this diagram, has a fractal surface, with filaments representing God's action on all scales, right down to the atomic. In other words, God sustains the laws of nature at the atomic level. This means, of course, that God knows everything that is going on everywhere. Moreover, being outside of time, God also knows the future as well as the present and the past. Now, this belief has caused philosophic problems for many people over the centuries. How can we individuals have free will when there is an all-knowing, all-powerful God present in everything? Indeed, is our future predetermined by God, meaning that we have no real choice about how our lives unfold? I venture to suggest that these paradoxes can be resolved by seeing the active involvement of God as continual, but not continuous. To see the difference, think of a line of fence posts. The posts are continual, meaning that they extend over a long distance, but the rail is continuous. Here is an analogy from school maths. You remember the number line, marked off at all the whole numbers? These whole numbers are continual. That is, they go on forever, but they are not continuous because they have wide gaps between them. Into these gaps we can insert fractions, and between any 2 fractions more can be inserted, and so on and on to a finer and finer scale. However, no matter how many fractions we insert, we never completely fill in the whole number line. The line can only be filled in by the so-called real numbers. These are special numbers that we would have to write as a decimal, with an unending stream of different digits after the decimal point. I'll give you 2 examples, the square root of 2 and pi. In a similar way, God acts, as it were, only at the fractions, leaving the natural world and ourselves to get on with things continuously in the space and time between them. God is therefore close to every event, even on the finest scale, but actually he acts only at a very few of these. We are free to get on with our decisions and actions, provided that they fit with the points at which God also acts. 2 important conclusions follow from this. First of all, the future is not predestined. From his position outside of time, God does see the whole span of time, but in terms of his intervention in the world, the future is undetermined. We humans work minute by minute alongside God to make the future come about. Our own thoughts, words and actions are as significant as God's in determining what will happen next. A second conclusion is that the events which God does act upon include our biological processes, our brain waves, our voices, our muscles, so he knows our every thought, word and action. He knows and cares for each one of us. He feels our woes. He smiles at our happiness. He can and will meet each one of us wherever we are in our life's journey. At this stage, we need to consider what the mechanism might be by which God's points of action can steer the molecules and microprocesses of our material world. After all, God is spirit and we are material, so there must be an interface between the spiritual and material worlds. How might it be bridged? An analogy with physics might help. From school science, you probably know about electrostatic induction. It causes the electric sparks when a nylon shirt is pulled from the tumble dryer, and on the grander scale it causes lightning. Let us recap what is happening here. On the atomic scale, an insulating solid like plastic consists of positively charged atom cores with a swirl of negatively charged electrons around them. The positive and negative charges balance, so normally the solid is electrically neutral. Now suppose a positively charged metal plate is held close to our plastic object. Since opposite charges attract and like ones repel each other, the electrons will move towards the external positive charge until the lattice of positive ion cores restrains them. The surface of the plastic now has a negative charge. If the polarity of the metal plate is reversed, the electrons are repelled and the surface takes on a net positive charge. In this way, the metal plate communicates with the plastic object across the empty space between them. In fact, if the charge on the metal plate changes in short and long bursts, like Morse code, an intelligible message will be picked up at the object. I'm suggesting, therefore, that God interacts with the atoms of the universe by a type of induction across the spiritual material interface. At the end of each of the fractal spikes, or filaments as they are on a fine scale, is a synapse at which spiritual information is transmitted. Let us push this analogy further. Suppose the surface of the plastic object were to become positively charged by its own accord. Induction would act in the reverse way across the gap to cause a negative charge at the metal plate. Here is the possibility then of two-way communication. If the nominal plastic object is in fact parts of our brain, God can signal to us in our thoughts, and we can, in reverse, signal back to God. This, of course, is prayer. We therefore have a situation in which God can speak to our thoughts by inductive communication with the biological processes in our brains, and we can in turn let our thoughts be known to God. By induction to material objects, including the brains of other people, God can effect small material changes which in aggregate can lead to our prayers being answered. For instance, your prayer might lead to God inducing thoughts in another person's mind. This might be a pricked conscience, a pang of compassion, a brilliant idea. They then alter their decisions and behaviour. Can prayer also lead to God causing changes in the inanimate material world? We might ask how God's intervention in events can be consistent with constant laws of nature. Perhaps this further paradox can be resolved by thinking a bit deeper about what we understand by a law of nature. Laws are essentially about repeatability in physics. They assure us that if exactly the same process is repeated several times from the same starting conditions, the outcomes will all be the same. We know, however, that some processes are very sensitive to the precise initial conditions, and also that at the atomic level quantum effects prevent simultaneous knowledge of the dynamical variables like position and momentum. What we call a law of physics is in fact a statistical average over many similar but marginally different events. Statistics gives a summary of trends when we are ignorant of the details or cannot comprehend the myriad prior events which have led to any particular observed outcome. Our laws of physics, then, cloak our ignorance. God, in contrast, knows all the details of what's been going on. There is enough leeway in any situation for God to cause variation in the outcome which we humans would still consider to be consistent with the laws of nature. By the accumulation of such micro-events, a macro-event can be shaped and our prayers answered. God can therefore steer the strategic direction of history without micromanaging or second-guessing we humans. Of course, the laws of nature stem from God, and he respects them. We can therefore be sure that God does not fix the lottery or routinely direct the weather, or that he will reverse global warming. Man has been given stewardship of the earth. Miraculous supernatural events are not ruled out, but typically miracles are to make it clear to the people witnessing the events that God himself is very present at that special time. Let us return to the induction model of communication across the spiritual material interface. It is well known that some materials are easy to induce charges in and others are not. The susceptibility for having charges induced under an applied electric field is called the polarizability of the material. It is measured by the dielectric constant. We can picture ourselves as being spiritually polarizable, with positive and negative qualities within ourselves. Some aspects of our nature are attracted to God and the good things which come from him, such as love, creativity, music, peace. Other aspects repel us from God, including envy, pride, anger, greed. Just as various dielectric materials differ in their ability to be polarized, depending on how tightly bound the positive and negative charges are to each other, so people are more or less buttoned up and bound to their own concerns, making them more or less responsive to spiritual promptings. However, this is something that individuals can and do control for themselves. By act of our own will, each of us can regulate our own spiritual polarizability, our responsiveness to the call of God. Many good people, including the Hebrew prophets and the Christian saints, have cultivated their spiritual polarizability to make themselves ultra-alert and responsive to God's promptings. Let us close by considering how Jesus would fit into this analogy. Polarizable materials are all insulators. However, Jesus, as God on earth, was so closely in contact with God in heaven that he was like a metallic conductor, not an insulator. He probably worked his healing miracles by a flow of God's power direct through him like electricity through a wire. Faith by others in Jesus was the switch to this. I'll close there. We've covered a lot of ground in this presentation. Perhaps you have your own thoughts and can propose your own analogies to discuss with friends.